On the book again.
Hope you've all brought your sandwiches. My fellow members of the Society of William Wallace, patriots of Scotland, family, friends and invited guests, may I, personally, wish you all a warm and sincere welcome to Elderslie. And despite what our Ayrshire neighbours and friends may claim, the rightful and true birthplace of Sir William Wallace. Once again, I am indebted to our tireless and dedicated convener, Mr. Duncan Fenton, for kindly asking me to say a few words on William Wallace on behalf of the Society. Having been born and raised in Elderslie, standing here before my fellow patriots and praising Elderslie's greatest son is a fantastic honour and the greatest of privileges. This memory will stay with me forever. Thank you again, Duncan. I promise I will try to keep this short and finish before darkness falls. As always, I humbly dedicate my words and thoughts to the immortal memory of Scotland's other greatest son, the late David R. Ross. The big warmer who continues to inspire and feed my insatiable hunger for Scottish history through his books and the recollection of my personal memories of a sadly missed and lamented friend. And what already has been a truly memorable and momentous year for Scotland, the name of William Wallace and the beliefs for which he fought, strived and dedicated his life, eventually to pay the ultimate price at the hands of a tyrannical madman, has never been more poignant or held the more significance than now. The ultimate goal that Wallace, de Murray, Bruce, James Douglas and the countless unknown ordinary men and women of Scotland who cared deeply enough to risk and dedicate their whole lives to achieve by the sweeping arc of the broadsword and claymore can be ours. The most desired status deserving of any nation, and which is a God-given right, is there to grasp, not with the thrust and cut of the battle swords of old, but with the two crossing strokes of the pen. The goal I'm referring to, of course, can be summed up in one word, and it is a simple but very powerful word. It is the most powerful word in any language, and this word is synonymous with Wallace in Scotland. The word is freedom. On a beautiful sunny afternoon, on the 23rd of August 2005 at Smithfield in London, at the plaque on the wall of St Bartholomew's Hospital, which marks the spot where Wallace was murdered, I, and some of you here today, along with Davy Ross and hundreds of patriots of Scotland, honoured Wallace. We raised our heads towards the heavens and we let Wallace know that he would never be forgotten, and we were there for him that day by shouting into the clear blue skies of London this one word. Please, patriots, raise your heads to the sky and punch the air as you shout it out with me now together, as a nation and people, united in one voice. And let William Wallace and Davy Ross know that we are here for them today, and they will never be forgotten. With me. Aye. Freedom! Yes. How sweet and satisfying does that sound hanging in the still air? Is there any one of us here who doesn't have a lump in their throat as we stand in the shadow of this monument that marks the birthplace and the deeds of our greatest hero, our greatest patriot, our greatest freedom fighter ever, the greatest Scot who ever lived? This very place where the fires of freedom sparked into life when the second son of a Stuart vassal opened his eyes and took his first breath of pure Scottish air, and was henceforth destined to lead his beloved Scotland to victory against the English armies of Edward I at Stirling Bridge. Throughout Scotland's often violent, bloody and colourful history, envious, greedy, vicious, warring nations and empires have thrust their unwanted attentions and ideals upon us. Inevitably, these factions have been led by a collection of self-centred, vindictive, paranoid, nasty, egotistical evil maniacs, hell-bent on bringing our proud and ancient nation onto our knees by brute force and cruelty. And that's hard to say without swearing. In a strange, bizarre way, I can always appreciate and understand why these monsters would want our Scotland and our people for their own, to rule and command. She is, after all, the finest jewel in any crown, and she is, without doubt, the greatest prize in all Christendom. Had I, by the grace of God, not been fortunate enough to be Scots born, Had I been born a devious, greedy foreign ruler, if I had seen through eyes filled with malice and envy this beautifully magnificent land and all she possessed and had to offer, I know I would want to rule her as part of my kingdom as well. But such is the strength and fortitude of this ancient land that we all call home, on every occasion when we have been under threat from the armies of tyranny and occupation, Scotland has seen fit to grace us with heroes and champions, leaders and warriors, more than capable of repelling any invading forces back over the border, or to drive them back into the sea from whence they came. Many have tried, and many have failed to conquer Scotland and the Scots. In the year 55 BC, the mighty Roman armies of the Emperor Julius Caesar quickly overpowered and subjugated southern Britain to Roman rule. Total conquest of what we now know as England was achieved by Rome under the Emperor Claudius in 43 AD, but they could never quite extend the empire to include Caledonia. It would eventually dawn on the emperors and military generals of ancient Rome that the tribes of this cold and foreboding land were the stuff of nightmares, and when their crack ninth legion of 6,000 highly battle-trained Roman soldiers simply disappeared into the glens of Scotland, with no trace ever found, no corpses, weapons, despite searching high and low, it only confirmed what every Roman foot soldier already feared. We really did invent fighting. The Emperor Hadrian thought to solve the problem by ordering the construction of a big wall in 128 AD, and when that didn't work 14 years later, the Emperor Antonius had the Antonine Wall built. Well, that didn't work either. Eventually the Romans realised that they could never defeat us and buggered off back to Rome in the year 410 AD. On October the 2nd, 1263, Viking forces led by King Håkon Håkonsson of Norway battled through violent stormy seas in their dreaded longships towards the west coast. 800 Viking warriors, including King Håkon himself, were swept inshore by the storm, and thanks only to superior Norse seamanship skills, successfully landed at Largs intact, where they were promptly dealt with by King Alexander III leading his army of 8,000 fighting mad Scots. One of the few times in history, thanks to the Scottish weather, that the odds were in our favour. This battle effectively ended any Viking domination of Scotland and her islands, and when King Håkon died in Orkney, later that same year, only that island and Shetland remained in the Norwegian hands after the Treaty of Perth in 1266. Tragically for Scotland, 20 years later, King Alexander, desperate to return into the arms of his newlywed young French queen as it was her birthday the next day, ignored warnings and rode at pace from Edinburgh Castle. He became separated in the dark, rain-lashed, windswept night from his guides and was to fall from his horse and to his death over cliffs at Kinghorn in Fife. And so, the darkest period in Scotland's history was set in motion. This conveniently brings my short travels through our bloodied past to the most detested, hated, quintessentially English monarch to ever set foot on Scottish soil. No speech of mine would be complete without my usual character assassination and personal opinions on the mindset of this odious creature. Patriots of Scotland, lads and lasses, I give you your old pal and mine, Eddie. Edward I, King of England, the Plantagenet, the first knight of Christendom, the hammer of the Scots. Or to give him his proper Scottish title and my personal favourite, that skinny, lanky, Billy Wally, steak of pish Longshanks. The one man responsible for centuries of bad blood and ill feeling between Scotland and our nearest neighbours. Feelings that still run high over 715 years later. Make no mistake, my friends, this immoral, greedy, over-ambitious, power-mad cesspit of an individual is solely to blame for the wars of independence that existed between Scotland and England and caused the deaths and suffering of countless thousands on both sides. A king of no virtue, whom history would prove beyond doubt to be a low-life, conniving, backstabbing liar. Close. A king who would promise one thing in his royal oath and then do the exact opposite if it suited his twisted agenda. A king who ordered his armies to systematically murder 15,000 innocent inhabitants of Berwick-upon-Tweed in 1296, and all because Scotland refused to accept his overlordship of our nation. A king who destroyed this nation's irreplaceable historical documents, burned churches, stole treasures, and we carried a worthless chunk of sandstone, which he believed was the stone of Scone back to London, to be placed under an English throne to represent dominance over Scotland. A king who so feared William Wallace that when the Wallace was shamefully betrayed and captured, he had him dragged to London in chains like a dog, and after a farce that constituted as a trial under English law, where Wallace had no legal representation, where the verdict was preordained before the proceedings had even started, he had the great Wallace butchered before a baying crowd as part of the day's market fair's entertainment. A king who foolishly believed that these barbaric acts would quell the rebellious Scots into submission. Longshanks, you should have done your homework into what makes we Scots tick, because in the words of another patriot of Scotland, born 653 years later and a far greater man than you would ever be, we're still here, Eddie. Still here. Here's just a wee afterthought to turn over in your minds. I'm sure most of you will already know of this, but for those among us who don't, on the side of Longshanks' sarcophagus containing his rotten, putrid, stinking remains in Westminster Abbey is a 16th century inscription in Latin. It reads thus, and forgive my pronunciation, but here goes. Edwardus primus Scotorum, males sicest 1308, pactum serva. Here is Edward I, Hammer of the Scots, 1308, keep the vow. It is displayed predominantly so as that every visitor and tourist to Westminster Abbey can see and read it and marvel at England's first knight of Christendom, the mighty Edward, and how he tamed the barbaric Scots in the 13th century and brought that rebellious savage rabble under English rule. Even today, English arrogance knows no bounds, and to think we still have within our nation's midst deluded countrymen and women who wish to continue a union with a country that openly promotes and gloats over a long-dead tyrant king whose pitiful life was obsessed with planning Scotland's destruction.